Okay.
Well, this is the Redacted Culture Cast, and today I am joined by yet again another Ranger who has gone quite further than the halls of the battalion. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm Garett Schwindel, former Army Ranger, contractor, multiple deployments, and serial entrepreneur, if you will.
All right. So, yeah, Garett, I became connected with you because actually not through Ranger Battalion, but we've actually met at SHOT Show. We've had a couple of really good conversations, so I've been excited to have you on. For those that are familiar with the show, thank you for your support. You guys have helped us out immensely through REDACTED.llc.com. We're very thankful for the growth and the expanse of this culture building project. So, Garett, I think there's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and there's been this burning kind of question on my mind, and that is, it seems like within American gun culture, there's a wall. There's a wall that it hasn't gotten through yet, which one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is because I think you're a bit of an antithesis to that. But American gun culture seems to be in an evolution. It's in a changing format from the kind of the ways of old that aren't the legendary Knights of the Round Table, but the sort of what people generally refer to as like the fuddy, the kind of anti-intellectual, the isolated, the I think isolating is probably the best term. To modern gun culture is much more about like community and getting to spend time with one another and have conversations about things that we think that matter, whether it's figuring out how to run a business or using that business or whatever we're working on for the good of the people who are around us, and sort of an antithesis to this generic American criticism of crony capitalism. And so while it's not an easy topic to break in, I kind of wanted to ask you about how your journey from Ranger Battalion, which in some aspects is immediately considered an achievement, to leaving the military and wandering or figuring out how you go through contracting and translating skill sets and trying to figure out that whole pipeline to you start a company, don't know how it works, do know how it works, and then you get to kind of where we're at now. How have you seen the community around you change? Because I come from Ranger Battalion, you come from Ranger Battalion, but we don't always have the exact same friends. How did you see that environment change around you, and what was it? Where were the moments where you said, okay, this is a lesson that I wish I'd learned earlier, but I'm thankful I learned it now?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to drill down on in kind of talking about all of that. I'll start by saying, just kind of the circle, when you're buddies with, serving Rangers at the same time, right? And there's even cliques within the Ranger battalions, right? Even within the platoons. And so then when I moved into contracting, there were even fewer Rangers that I knew. So the clique would change, and some of the people that I didn't hang out with, I started to hang out with because we had a common bond, which was, we were Rangers serving as contractors. So, it's kind of a morphing thing. And then, I think, I started just making more friends from all over because there was more people from different backgrounds, JTACs and SEALs and Marines. And so, you never knew who you were going to be rooming with on the next deployment. So, I always made it a point to, if I was rooming with a JTAC, I'm like, hey, teach me something. I wanted to know, okay, how does a SEAL do this specifically, and just kind of compare notes. So, it's just kind of been an evolution of that, I think that's what you were asking, right?
Yeah, I mean, it helps out. It raises this idea that I think within modern, when I'm referring to gun culture, there seems to be this idea of like we always want to be a perennial student. We always want to be able to learn from other people, and you see it I can definitely understand the clique kind of concept. There's definitely a crowd here and a crowd there within Ranger Battalion, whether it's defined by your love of country music or something, or there's other variations. And I know that can sound like a bit of a simplification of it.
No, there's guys that are into motorcycles, guys that are into drinking beer with the boys, guys that are into, fitness, right?
Yeah, there's different groups.
Like almost like they're humans, right?
Oh no, goodness gracious.
Behaving as humans do.
Yeah, and then because I took the contracting route as well, and I think within our culture, there's this idea. It's like maybe it's a virtue that it's this willingness to learn from people from different branches. Because when I was in Ranger Battalion, every other branch was dumb. Everybody else who did anything else was dumb. SEALs were stupid; they had hair and book deals. Marines were stupid because I don't know, But the moment I got out of battalion and started working in a different world, all of that kind of went away. And
yeah, I think it's all comes from consider the source of driving the narrative, right? Like you got to have unit pride. It means you got to perceive yourself and convey out of your mouth that we are better, we are elite. Here's all the reasons why these guys aren't as good. But once you get out of that bubble and into a bigger boat, right, or a bigger bubble, and it's like, oh, okay, like you would just have to be a fool not to glean every bit of information from everybody that you could.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of guys do that, right? They're like, stuck in their ego won't allow them to maybe entertain the idea of maybe this group does do this thing better than us, right?
Yeah, and there's a very clear example of it within the civilian citizen side of gun culture that they can see. Like if you've never been in the military, and so that form of esprit de corps, which is sort of like a half serious, we're better than everybody else attitude. Because I mean, even when you're in Ranger Battalion, if you do a joint op with somebody else and they do something that you think is really like, oh gosh, that made a world of a difference, you're not gonna, with exceptions, reject it because it came from the SEALs or the MARSOC guys or the JTACs or whatever. There's very few people, even in Ranger Battalion, who are going to stick to some form of orthodoxy without, when they can actually see the positive effects of somebody else's choices and decisions. But within American gun culture writ large, that's outside of the military or expanded larger than, I think for people outside of the military, it can be a little odd looking in and seeing how people treat each other's units. And that can cause a bit of maybe that can leave a sour taste. But I think more importantly is that what I'm starting to be curious at is we're seeing a bit of a siloing between veterans and non-military citizen gun culture people, where the non-military citizen side is sort of isolating the veterans out, I guess, is a way of saying it. Because we all want to learn from each other. Like if I'm a military vet, I would love to learn from a SWAT guy. And that sounds like a really good platitude, but what does it look like? Because what are some examples of things that you learned from people who are not from the Rangers while you were contracting?
I learned the vast majority outside the Ranger Regiment, of what the different things I know and the level of depth that I know. Ranger Regiment for me was a foundation, right? Where it's sturdy, it's robust, you can count on it, right? It's going to operate, it's going to do its job. But then it's you go on and learn other things, and I think that I think what you started to ask is, there's this division between the civilian gun culture and military, right? And so, humans are inherently, as much as we're very different, we're pretty much we have similar attributes, right? And
Yeah.
so this would go back to like, what makes Ranger Regiment cool? Well, it's the tribalism, right? It's a bunch of people that share your common interest, your common goal, and it's leveled up because you had to pay a price to get there. So that the guy to the left and right of you wants it just as bad, if not more than you, right? So the civilian side, it's like, just because they didn't go to the military doesn't mean that they aren't looking for some sort of tribe, right? And
Exactly.
so you could have a sewing group, you could have a bowling league, you can have, and just so happens that gun culture there's a lot of macho-ness in it. And so if I'm a regular Army vet with 10 years and I see a civilian on social media that's just can shoot way better than me, well, human ego most times will just take the easiest path and start trashing that person, right? And oh, you would never do that in real life, but you know what I mean, like all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were being honest with themselves, they would be like, shit, I could learn from this guy.
Yeah, I think
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I definitely
we can learn
can
from
see
each
that.
other.
Yeah. I definitely can see that in the sense of like I had to go through that experience when I started shooting competition. Like I was at within let's just say the standards of military accomplishment, I was in the upper percentile. Not like AMU or anything, but I was a DMR, and I had enough of reputation in third bat that I was a decent shot. That worked out well for me, but as soon as I hit the 3-gun stage, I was probably in the bottom third. My first 3-gun match, easily bottom third, and
a little bit of humble pie is good for everybody once in a while, because it kind of recalibrates you, and you stop believing your own bullshit.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you reality. If you hold, I think there's a term I've used in the past that like naivety is the things that you believe before they're confronted by reality. And
that's a good saying, yeah.
And so I would definitely see that one. And I see that within the competition world. But, when I come back down to the principle of being able to be a student and learn from everybody, I unfortunately have my set of experiences, which I've had to look at through the lens of my own intellect or my own mind or whatever. And so I can see the times where I've learned from other people. But when you were saying you were learning from your JTACs and your SEALs and all these other people, are you talking about like this is how you learned things that built your business or human interaction, like how to talk to people kind of thing? Because there is a communications aspect. No one cares how good of a ranger you are if you can't talk to people.
Yeah.
Because that your lifespan in battalion probably ends after team leader, because once you're a squad leader, you need to be able to communicate an idea up to the platoon sergeant and the platoon leader, and probably even beyond, and back down to your guys. And if you can't do that because your vocabulary is 7 words long,
yeah, and 2 of them are fuck.
Yeah, well, yeah, right.
I mean, so yeah, I think it's just it's an evolution of things, right? So during my contracting time, I wanted to know from my roommates from the different various branches, like tactical, technical stuff, right? How do you peel the cat, right? So just the more information you have to work with, the better. If you refine multiple ideas, you're going to ultimately get a better end product, right? Instead of just having, this is my reality. It's always been my reality. So, and then, transitioning out into the business world, it's being humble enough to putting your ego aside and just being inquisitive and willing to help people. And you know what I mean? Because, I don't know how many opportunities have been brought to my table just because, I was a good dude, or I wanted to try to help people get to where they were going. So that, your circle and how you interact determines a lot of the outcome in your life. I would say, at least for me. I mean, I have what I have now because of that very thing today. Like, I'm not an inherently smart guy. I was an average student. I didn't want to be in school, but I have like two things that I always say. I'm like, I'm too dumb to know what I can't do and too dumb to quit. And that's like a wicked mixture for a guy with kind of my level of understanding, right? And you'll be amazed at how much you can learn if you've got those two things in common. Too dumb to know what you can do, that'll get you in the door, and then too dumb to quit. You just inherently will just pick up information and build a Rolodex of frame of reference.
Another good example that comes up pretty frequently, because we tend to have Rangers on the show because it's an easy segue for me to talk about, is Ranger School itself. And one of the easiest ways to pass Ranger School is just figure out how to get yourself not to quit. Ranger selection, RASP has a similar attitude to it, and a lot of that is how the military tries to deal with attrition. And whether or not we're arguing that attrition model is effective or not at producing ideal soldiers is not the point. The question that people are usually trying to figure out is, how do you pass Ranger School? And one of the easy answers is you don't quit. But quitting in Ranger School is a very easily defined subject. It's putting up my hand or ringing the bell at buds or whatever it is. But once you get out of the military, and I think a lot of veterans struggle with this one, is the idea of not quitting doesn't look the same. Because I don't have a timeline. I'm not saying, okay, Ranger School is pretty straightforward. If I get my go and I do my work and I don't become a complete tool bag, maybe I bribe the rest of my guys on my team. Because like, you get peered out, and there's like, I definitely had one phase of Ranger School where I was the only bat boy of all the guys. And how did I figure out how to get through it? Nobody posthumously removed my tab, but like, I stole food from the RIs and I gave it to the guys on my platoon. So they're like, they always knew that if they were hungry, I had something. And so,
yeah. And I think like, you were saying, like, there was a finish line in sight.
Yeah.
Where there's not a finish line once you get out. Right. And so, the military is good at building attributes into you, performance-based attributes, whether you want to or not, right? Like, you get up early, you work out, you do shit you don't want to do, you get smoked, you get humiliated, you know what I mean? And then you have to earn your way up. And when Mother Army isn't there anymore, telling you when to get up, telling you to make your bed, telling you when to, to work out, well, then it's like, okay, did I hardwire those attributes in myself enough that I can keep it going independent of having a known endpoint and somebody behind me holding me to the standard? That's really where I see the train goes off the tracks for a lot of people. That they are so used to being told what to wear, when to be where, what they're doing, that when that, and it's basically another form of parenting in my mind's eye.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, it's like, do this or you're going to get punished. Do this or you're going to get punished. Like, you have no other choices but to do that. But when nobody's over you hovering anymore, it's like, okay, did I take away enough, characteristics and use them to my advantage that I can go forward and kick ass. And that's, and I think a lot of it is like, if the best and coolest thing that I ever did was being a Ranger, well, then, you know what I mean? Then you might as well put a bullet in me, because it's just going to be stories about how good I used to be. Right. So you gotta kind of always be, humans thrive on identifying challenges and beating them. And then you get your win, and that, that motivates you to do the next thing. Right. And so, I think, just kind of, that's why all these like motivational speakers have all these boot camps and stuff. Like, people are looking for that. They just don't know how to drive themselves. They just don't know how to set goals for themselves. They just don't know how to, you know what I mean? self-analyze to be like, all right, like I need to hack my situation because I'm not living the life that I want.
No, I definitely agree with you there in the sense of getting out of the military, you sort of exchange prolonged adolescence in certain things for advanced maturity in others very quickly, right? So like, and you are like, let's take a really good example of this one. I think that fits within gun culture is that if you're a guy coming out of Ranger Battalion who was fortunate enough or unfortunate, depending on your math, I don't care, to be in battalion during a deployment cycle and see conflict and see combat, like the one thing that you're gaining is you should be gaining is quite a bit of maturity when it comes to violence and how it actually works out. And it doesn't need to be patronizing, or what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't need to be patronizing or oversimplified, but it's not that just you have experiences, but that you've started to realize that things really aren't how you understood them before, and you figure out how to communicate to them. Whether that's you get out of the military and you start running a training course and you can kind of sort out things where like you're really concerned about getting the shooter is really the person you're instructing is really concerned about, I don't know, getting like the perfect cheek weld, but they're not paying attention to the one thing that matters is actually getting the shoulder, the stock in the shoulder and your sight picture or something, right? And so you can really figure out that like, oh yeah, I remember the first time I shot it. I've told the story in the show before. I remember the first time I shot an M4 and I was extremely underwhelmed because I'd grown up with a Mini 14 and I was like, oh, it's one of those, but it has a springier sound. But then, you know, we added suppressors and Mark 18s and all this kind of crap. And it was like, so I remember when I got out of the military, it's like, well, and I remember as I'm thinking now, like, you can fight as much as you want about having that stock deep in your shoulder pocket or up on the shoulder or whatever, but it's an AR-15. Like, you can shoot that pretty decent. I've shot it plenty of times with the stock barely on my shoulder. Not saying it's the best, but sometimes that's what you got to do. And being in the military or being in Ranger Battalion kind of helps you become mature within I know that I can see a person's body posture and say, that is not a threat. That person is pretending to be a threat, but he's not, because I know what a threat looks like, and that's not it. And I can be mature in that sense, but I am a complete child when it comes to money management, or a complete child when it comes to business development. And so,
yeah, I think, you know, like, I mean, we're almost stating the obvious here, but like your every experience that we interact with gives us more frame of reference, right? And so, you know, so yeah, like, you know, we learned how to read people's body language overseas. We learned how to be like, oh, that's the first time I ever saw a person's body do that, right? Or, you know what I mean? You know, there's a lot of, I think over the 20 years of the GWAT there's a lot that comes home with you that you don't necessarily, it's not apparent. It's like a slow sneaking in a rear naked, right? And then eventually, you know, these guys are depressed and, you know, and drinking and drugging and, you know, there's some of that's brought back that I don't know if they can actually like put their finger on a singular event, right? Because I know like during my first deployment, I mean, we were 1 to 2 HVT hits a night, right? So, I mean, you know, in that 3.5, 4 month window, it was like, oh my gosh, like, first of all, my first thought was, I'm not going to get out of this deployment alive. And then, you know, it was just a series of like, just crazier shit over and over and over. And it's like, you basically got used to that. I'd be like, okay, like nothing's really going to mess me, you know, but then you get like, you don't have time to process that. Right. And then you come home and you're like, you know what I mean? And it's like, holy shit, like my brain just got all 10,000 first time experiences, you know what I mean? And a lot of them are negative, you know? So,
I get that. I think the hard one being, and this is the hard one being the post-military veteran who, you know, is maybe is at that point where he's staring down the bottle, or he doesn't know what's going, you know, like there's many different examples of how this can be played out. But one thing that I've found out is that one thing that I've found out is that feeling of, I don't know, being lost and having no place is not actually that exclusive to veterans. Now, there's an exclusivity.
Agreed.
There's an exclusivity when it comes to the context of how they got there. There's
right.
there is no translation from, I'm a veteran, I saw a bunch of combat and I'm trying to process it, now I'm back into the United States and I'm trying to figure out life. There's no translation to, I saw hard things that I haven't processed yet that I'm trying to work through, to a guy who's never been in the military and never, you know, like there's not a one-to-one, and then we're not trying to put those two together, but that sense of, I was reading before there's a book that I've enjoyed in the past where it talks about one of the problems in our age is this thing called the malaise of imminence, which kind of translates into, we only live in the moment and none of it matters. And how for a lot of people, I think veterans in our conversation fit into the, I don't know how to set a mission, also applies to people who are in gun culture, but not veterans in any sense. And they're like, I don't know how to contribute or what to aim at or where to go in a bigger picture other than look cool, have gear, get fit, shoot competition.
Yeah. So I have a theory about that, or I think it aligns with that. So as humans, we are built to optimize our situation at every turn, right?
I mean, I think there's a lot of loaded assumptions in there, but I can generally agree with you in the sense that we as humans, whether it's through adaptation and evolution or by design,
more of an immediate, right? So we have beds that sit us up. We have remotes to turn on our TV. We have heaters in our cars that we drive to, right? Like humans innovate out of necessity, out of want, right?
Yeah, we solve problems. If the oceans rise, we move away from the oceans. We generally speaking don't just wait for the world around us to destroy us. Generally speaking.
Right. So with that, like if we're constantly optimizing, that means we're removing problem sets, right? Like you didn't wake up and have to stoke the fire because you're sleeping outside, out in the elements, right?
Yep. I'm not. I'm in a library, or I'm in my office.
But so we benefit from the inventions that make our lives easier. Okay, and so I mean, so I'm going to give an example. You know why? You know, it's a common thing that people retire and then they die immediately after or short thereafter.
Yeah, they have nothing to aim at. They have no reason left to live.
Exactly. So if you grow up in a society full of convenience and you don't know how to put those challenges out there, because we thrive like having a problem, tackling it, that gives us a good win. That makes makes us feel good, and it gives us kind of a little boost to go into the next thing or the next day. And so when you grow up in a life of convenience and you haven't had your parent or your, platoon sergeant or your aunt or whatever, you didn't have to earn and set goals for yourself, then we're basically a byproduct of our own convenience, I think.
I can agree with you there in a sense of a diagnosis. Like you can definitely see the effects of convenience on a population, whether it's opulence or decadence or passivity, right? And I can agree with you in the sense of perhaps you've lived in an environment, regardless of where you're at on the economic totem pole, where you've never had to set goals for yourself. I can understand that as a criticism. Where I have a challenge is it doesn't provide a solution, because I can tell you that I know people who have grown up in very wealthy families who've never had to figure anything out for themselves, and they are no better off for it. Or I have met people who are not high on the economic totem pole who have abdicated the responsibility of their decision making to anybody else their entire life, and those two people are dealing with the same problem. So I can say that I grew up in a world of convenience, because regardless of who you are, if you were raised in America, there are challenges, but we can kind of skip past the political semantics of who wants to say who was more oppressed, and we can get to the point of being able to identify that I have a lack of meaningful objectives to strive for doesn't solve the fact that I have a lack of meaningful objectives to strive for. And maybe I'm sitting here going, I don't know how to sort through and write one down and figure out what it is. Because for many people, myself included, when I hit the where do I want to go to college phase of my life, I was like, all of these college degrees look completely empty to me. Though there's no achievement, no value in them. So I said, I'm going to pick the military. I'm going to pick the hardest thing that I can think of right at the time, and I'm going to strive for that. And so I abdicated 4 more years or 5 more years of that responsibility of trying to set a goal, and I put it on Big Army and Big Ranger Bat to tell me what to do. And so when I got out of the military, I again kind of pushed that off, and I said, all right, I'm going to contract for a bit and then go to college. But once I was out of college, there was no goal in front of me that I could really align at, and it took a time to start figuring that out. And so I can tell the story on how I got there, but now the question is, for people in gun culture, how do you solve that problem of setting a goal, picking something worthy to aim at?
Yeah, I mean, so your circle, right? If your circle isn't pushing, if your circle isn't a good representation of where you want to be, you're in the wrong circle. Let's say you don't have a circle. Well, there's a bunch of people making loads of money doing these boot camp seminars, right? And kind of, you go away for a week or 2 weeks, and they kind of smash you in the surf, and they break you down, and they teach you stuff, and you basically get that tribal environment. You kind of go through a little bit of a sucky event with guys that you just met. There's that bonding, right? But,
a rite of passage. Yeah. Pseudo rite of passage.
Yeah, and some people, it's like they feel like they need to have a physical struggle. Some guys feel like they need to go take a course, right? And kind of commune over, ooh, what's your red dot? Ooh, I like this trigger. Oh, you know what I mean? Like everybody's different, but I think if your circle isn't a good representation of where you're trying to go, then you need to change your circle.
That can sound really brutal to a lot of people. If you've known somebody for a long time, and let's just say they aren't the crackhead on the corner, because like you were saying earlier, like people will find conveniences, and there's that joke going around that like crackheads will always find crack. But when it comes to relationships, friendships in your circle, I think that presents 2 problems, and one of them might be a secret that can't be given away because it can't be identified. So if you can identify that the people who you're surrounded with are not the kind of people that you want to be, that's one half of the equation. How then would you recommend somebody who has who I'm going to have to preface this one more time. I can make the assumption that if you enter a circle of productive people and your only objective is to be a leech, you won't be there very long, because they will isolate you out and you will find yourself in the fringe.
They will smell it on you, right? And they will get down to the root cause of your motives, right? But being a motivated individual that wants to be better doesn't come off bad, right? But if you're there for the wrong reason, then you put off this scent, right? That the people they're like, you're not here for the right reasons.
Let's assume that's a self-correcting error, and go back to the question of how would you recommend people find people because I think the biggest problem that men, especially men, I'm sorry, the biggest problem that Americans face, one of the biggest problems that Westerners face, especially men and also veterans, is isolation. It's really, really hard to try to figure out everything that we have. All of our conveniences are directing us towards isolation. And I don't care at all whether it's malicious intent by insert conspiracy and or bad guy here, or just the nature of things. I no longer am interested in whether or not it's nurture or nature, cause or natural. The challenge that we have for so many people within this culture, and as men and as veterans, is we're isolated and we don't know how to find people of quality.
So let me ask you. So I want to do a little. Why is it that when, like, I grew up in, the mid 80s and mid 90s, I was, born in 80, so I was a kid, till 1998, right? And in that time, our neighborhood, families would get together, you would go out and introduce yourself. I would mow people's lawns. We would have group barbecues. If me and my brother were screwing around, the dad down the street didn't have a problem dragging us by the collars back to the house and handing us off to our dad, So, and it's not like that today. Why?
Do you want an answer, or is this?
Well, I want to discover the answer together.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think you touched on it, right?
It's like non-rhetorically, I think there's a number of influences, and one of them is that we've embraced a form of multiculturalism that is more focused on isolation than actually being involved with each other. Like, right. I think that's one. I think, and the other one too is I think we've offloaded the responsibility of community to the government as individuals. We blame the government for everything instead of recognizing that, like, there's nobody telling you that you can't get to know your neighbor. And then you meet him and you realize he's a political extremist of the other direction than you are. And your first reaction is to feel good that you're not like them. And then you go home and wonder why you're isolated. That's one issue that I think of, is that, like, we've exported the responsibility of our neighborhood to the farthest possible person. And that's like the president, or or for some people,
it's laying the blame as far away from your own feet as you can,
or abstracting it ad infinitum into, like, oh, it's just postmodernism. It's like, yeah, I can identify that it's postmodernism, but that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. Well, so, I think, you could talk about the advent of technologies, right? Like, phones and tablets and TVs are, an easy distraction that keeps us from going outside and meeting our neighbor when he's out watering the lawn, right? I will tell you that, I live up in the Pacific Northwest, right across the river from Portland in southern Washington. And, this is a liberal territory up here, And
you have a spicy backyard. You have a spicy, yeah.
But, well, yeah, the purple hairs don't scare me, but I moved into a neighborhood recently, and there was this. We live in a cul-de-sac, and it's maybe 20 houses in this development, and we're the new people on the block. And so there was this Halloween party, for the kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went and met almost every single one of my neighbors. It was like 20 different households and probably 2.5 kids for each house. I mean, and they were running everywhere. I was like, holy, this is a flashback to how I grew up, and they were kind of telling us, like, it's a cool little bubble inside of this bigger thing that's not operating that way. And it's like, they were saying, we all watch out for each other's kids. It's not weird to have another person's kid, like, up in your house with your kid, raiding the pantry. And I'm like, that's how I grew up. You know what I mean? And so, I think the fear of, or sometimes thinking that we are two very different people keeps us from discovering how actually aligned we are.
Okay, yeah, I can agree with that one. I think it's culturally expedient and politically popular to
Stiff arm.
make the assumption, right? Like,
Yeah.
and don't
Yep.
get me wrong, this isn't the argument that like everybody in this country can just get along and be friends. I think there are people within our society who have already self-segregated themselves out of polite society. We just haven't figured out. We just don't, like they just have that hasn't become obvious yet. There are things that you can believe or do in this culture where there's no breaking bread at the table. But those situations and those things are not common. They're not as whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, we can, and like I said, I think we can offload that responsibility, or we tend to offload that responsibility. And I would say, like, even for like right wing politics, is like Joe Biden just gave a speech and now he said something terrible, like, oh, if you don't vote for me, you're a fascist or something like that. And we can go home and say, oh, okay, all Democrats are into this crazy stuff or whatever. But that doesn't do anybody any good.
You're just chugging from the propaganda machine, right? Remove the variables and go direct to the source. Hey, just because you're my neighbor and you have different political ideologies than me, doesn't mean we can't be friends. Doesn't mean we can't watch each other's kids. Doesn't mean, I can't take your trash bins out for you while you're on vacation. You know what I mean? Like, and I think, if you choose to talk about religion or politics or any of the things that are very polarizing, you do it in a respectful way. But
yeah,
I think, but everybody's gotten so like, I'm team this, you're team that, you're the enemy. It's like, well, that's a very simplistic way of going through your life.
Yeah, and we can even take that caricature of life and recognize how silly it was, because even when we were overseas in, say, Iraq and Afghanistan, it wasn't like we looked at the population that we were involved with as some sort of generic bad guy from Star Wars or whatever. It wasn't like, oh, you're dressed like an Afghani, you must be a terrorist. Bam. Like belief system, the only people who believe that are the kind of people who we kind of don't care about their opinions whatsoever. Yeah. Like this idea, I think a really classic example is like the idea of like the baby killer, where like you're going overseas to crush baby skulls. Like if you legitimately think that's what the military does, then I don't know what to say to you, because there's nothing I can do for your position. But
it's just a convenient, quick statement an overarching statement. It's and they don't want to peel that onion.
I think it's a sign of mental infidelity. Yeah, I think it's a sign of mental impotence. Like if that's what you honestly believe, then I can't engage in an intelligent conversation with you about something. It's like, okay, cool, just ring up my groceries and leave me alone.
But there are people who take that, say it literally, and those are the ones that really. Well, I mean, but you take that or any other number of sayings, like if you believe that literally, then I feel sorry for you, because you're one brain cell away from like writing a note on your hand to remind yourself to breathe, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like a statement that encapsulates a theme, right? It's just a quick, very, slices through. So, I don't know. It's the older I get, the more like people try to chunk problems, right? But it's like,
we naturally do this. It's human nature.
But it's infinite, because you've got black, white, and then every shade of gray in between. And so like, where do you snap the chalk line to chunk it out, right? And even biological twins are different, because they have different experiences, and so that nature nurture thing you had mentioned, even biological twins are different. So if we can take the two biologically most accurate to each other and now other people, it's like, holy shit, like you're already lost in the sauce before you can begin.
Yeah, if you can take two, biological twins, and they will turn, given nurture, they will change their outcome, and they'll become different people. I think I want to make sure we're not getting too off topic here, because we were addressed. I think it's a really useful subject, and I think it, especially given the times, like for us to be able to figure out how to talk to each other and how to build relationships with our neighbors is in many ways kind of the point of this production in general. Because like we can talk about how valuable it is to have a tribe and a community, but for I think many of us out here, the idea of building that tribe is, for most of us, feels like a fictional concept that can only exist in like a TV show or a book or something. Whereas we all want to come together. Many of us want to come together. I don't say all is a little bit too absolute, but I'm thinking, I want to be a part of a community. How do I build one? How do I be a part of something? What assets do I bring to the table? How do I figure out who is, how do I pursue a tribe and a community that maybe, how do I pursue sorry. I'm thinking about it this way. Short question, long answer. I'm looking to build that tribe of people who I can look up to and say, I want to be like them. I want to be like this guy because he runs a successful business, and this guy because he's written a successful book. And I want to build my tribe around these people. And I don't know how to do that. I don't really know how to say get inside that circle, but, I'm also aware enough that I want to make sure my intentions are pure, and I'm not just trying to be in the clique to be in the clique. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, if you need to know all the answers before you get started, you're fucked, right? Like,
all right.
Like you learn the answers after you take a step and another step and another step, and I changed angles here. I meet this person. I'm really interested in that. And then I meet their friends that are interested in that. So it's the journey is the teacher, right?
Yeah.
But if you need to have all of your pre-required boxes checked of where you want to go, what to, and what are all your motivations, you're never going to get started, because and even once you get there, it's like, well, shit, this isn't where I wanted to be, because I was so rigid about following what, my preconceived notion of absolute right was, that I was too blind to turn left when, an option or an opportunity was presented to me.
Okay. That does make sense, because I think within the context of the question, you're saying, chill out, you're overthinking it. If you're to the point where you're trying to figure out it all, like make a step and then adjust, and make a step and then adjust, and make a step and then adjust, and as you go.
Yeah, I think you don't have to. I mean, what are we trying to solve for here? Like, guys, there's this cultural divide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we get guys that don't have camaraderie, a tribe? What advice do we get? Just take a step, like get outside of your comfort zone. Like I told you, like I said earlier, we are built to optimize our situation, which means, not going out because I don't want to be tired tomorrow. Well, okay. Or that's a lost opportunity to meet new people, depending on where you're going. There's so many, we just, as we go through life, we optimize and sharpen and sharpen and sharpen and sharpen and sharpen. And then it's like, well, shit, now it's really sharp, but I'm so narrowed in that I missed all these opportunities to be like, I could do these other things. I can meet these other people. I didn't explain it very well, but.
No, I'm kind of, I think I can sort through it too, because like the idea of opportunities within a business aperture, makes sense. Like if I'm so focused on, let's just say, one perceived outcome, I completely miss all of the other contributing factors. Like say the classic example would be like, my goal is in 3 years to have $1 million in the bank, and that's all I'm focused on. And because I've built my plan ahead of time on that's how I'm going to achieve it, I miss the opportunity to make 10 million, or I miss the opportunity to, you know,
exactly.
And I can see that in that framework. When it comes to people and tribes, since it's a little bit more ambiguous, I think what it looks like in my end is you're going to be able to perfectly rationalize every reason why you shouldn't do the one thing that you're supposed to do. You're going to be able to perfectly rationalize why all of your friends are not going to receive your inquiry correctly. You're going to be able to rationalize why every single thing that you should do. Let's just take an example. You know, you're going to, with the evening event, like there's an event that's taking place that is centered around a subject that I'm interested in learning and being involved with, but I'm not going to go to it, not because I want to be responsible about not being tired the next day, but because I'm actually nervous about the social interactions with people, and I'm more nervous about the social interactions, so I'm going to justify it by saying I don't want to be tired.
You hit it right on the head, right? And it's like oftentimes we talk ourselves out of the very thing that will launch us in the direction of where we want to go. Nobody achieved anything great without, like, in total comfort.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's a broad statement. I mean, the majority of good shit in my life, I had to pay the man. You know what I mean? Like, over and over and over and over. And it's like the easy stuff, that's a little win. The hard stuff usually is attached to a bigger win.
Yeah, and I think paying the man comes in very different formats, because sometimes we don't know what to aim at, so we'll just pick something that feels like paying the man and not know what we're getting out of it. And I think of that in the military. Like, going to Ranger Battalion doesn't make you a real boy. Being a CAG dude or a Delta Force guy or a SEAL Team 6 dude doesn't make you a real person.
Yeah.
So, and if you set your entire identity on simply passing buds, once that's gone, you're going to have a hell of an identity crisis for the next 6 months to a year or whatever it is.
Or you get out of the military and now your identity's gone, and the best you ever were was, that last deployment, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you're like, if you've basically deadlined your future, if yesterday was your greatest day.
Yeah. In the military, we criticize people who their greatest achievement in life was that they were the quarterback in football while we were in battalion. Like, oh, well, that's Corporal Cheese Brain. And he's like, oh yeah, he never doesn't talk about when he was a quarterback. And so in battalion, we're like, why are you looking at your high school football or your high school, I don't know, body count, if you want to go down that line of like who you were, and now you're in Ranger Battalion and you're still in high school, or you get out of the military and and I think there's grace to be given for people who are getting out, who have gotten out of the military, because whether you've given in 5 years or 15 years or 20, that's a lot of emotional investment that you got to kind of work through.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, I think if we get to conflating different veins within this talk track, it might come off a way that it's not intended, right? So, if we're talking, the guys getting out, well, yeah, I mean, you were, told where to be, what uniform, you know what I mean? And so now you've got to utilize those attributes, but in the form of self-discipline, and you have to set your own objectives and your own, standards, but it's too easy. Human nature is like, hit the easy button. It's too easy to hit the snooze button. It's too easy to eat the candy bar instead of the Brussels sprouts. It's, you know what I mean? It's, so if you get that out of balance, too far out of balance, you're whack, or like, you're not producing. And if you go too far the other way, you're stroking out because you're just, the stress is eating you up, right? So balance and everything.
I can get it in the sense of you can pursue comfort while also dealing with the existential crisis of not having a mission. And so if that's the case, if that's the position that you're in, set a mission. Like that is as if your life depends on it. And if you're, and I see this in the sense of like nihilism, where nothing has meaning anymore. Oh, I'll never be able to be a ranger again, so nothing has meaning anymore. Like you have to really, if that's your attitude, whether or not you're coming from bat or not, what you really need to do is have that really hard look in the mirror and say, am I really just telling myself this so I can continue to pursue convenience?
Well, I think if you were to have any, the formula is simple, right? If you're in a place where you're like really down, set easy goals. Write them where you can see them every day, multiple times a day. So on the bathroom mirror, for example, you write down, all right, make your bed. Say one nice thing to a person today. Eat one clean meal, and then you tackle the easy ones, and then that momentum, you start feeling good, and then you start setting loftier goals, right? And so it's a living document that because you write it down, it's multimodal, right? You're writing it, you're seeing it, you can even say it. So that's 3 different mechanisms of driving it into your brain in one snapshot, and multiply that throughout the day. And then every night, check off the ones you did and set new ones. And I guarantee you it's, I've got friends that are like, get to $50 million, dollars in my company, or have an acquisition, event happen, or buy the third property that they're going to Airbnb out. And then I've also got guys on the other end of the spectrum where they're like, man, I'm fucking lost, And so it's like, you just gotta bite off what you can chew at for the level that you're at. And
I think Jordan Peterson's talked about this, and a number of people have brought this up, in that like maybe a little bit of humility is looking at what you're capable of right now and pursuing the biblical idea. I mean, there is the the passage in Proverbs, to him who is faithful with little, much will be given. And some of it goes into just this idea of, like if you're having an existential crisis that you're not the CEO of a Fortune 500 company right now, focus on the things that you can do. And we look at each other too. I think a lot of bringing it back into gun culture, we spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to one another, like a lot of time, or at least a decent amount of energy, where it's like, oh, I can shoot better than him, or I have more followers than him, or I have more, my kit is better set up than him, or I can run a better RPAT than him, or you have all these like standards and unwritten examples of how we completely sideline anything that's valuable that we have to say, because we go home and then we just become a curmudgeonly little shit, and we complain to ourselves, even if we don't do it in public, about the success of other people, or the I don't care, right? I mean, I do, but so I think that within gun culture, we sideline ourselves, or not sideline, we undermine ourselves quite a bit, because we do the things that we say we shouldn't be doing, and like comparing and being, divisive, but we just don't do it as in public, yet it still leaks out through the culture.
I think, chunking this into big bites, and then we can narrow down. I was thinking about this before the podcast. So I used to do there was an entrepreneurial school up in the Bay Area, and it was for people that had already owned a business and sold it for millions of dollars, and were starting a new company, right? And so they would come to this entrepreneurial school, and it was a condensed school, but and the guy who put it on, he could cherry pick and invest, right? So if your idea was good enough, it was kind of you could flip the switch and just start running with it. But the guy, he's a multi-billionaire, third generation venture capitalist. he made him do a survival week. And so I was out there teaching survival. And they all had to go through an AR-15 and a Glock FAM and qual, right? And so 90%, I would say 95% were like, we would ask them, you know, we had like 3 sets of 20 students like rotate through, you know, in a given day, right? So, and we would ask them, all right, how many people don't like guns? And about 95% of them were like, guns are the devil, they're bad, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
The conversion rate after they shot and had that experience with it, it's just like, this thing's not dangerous. You know what I mean? Because I know how to manipulate all the things. I know what it does. You demystify it. We had a conversion rate of almost like everybody. It was just like, and so I talked to, you know, I was watching this and kind of asking, you know, over and over the students, you know, all right, now who's, you know, thinks guns are bad, right? And they're like, yeah, I was totally wrong. And so I went to we were having dinner one night with the guy who runs the school, and I was like, man, this is like, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a big conversion just through the experience. And he goes, yeah, and that translates into votes at the ballot box. And I was like, well, you're a billionaire for a reason. Like, you're thinking layers, you know, inside of this whole shebang you got going on. You're thinking steps ahead where there's another, you are aware of another upside potential, right? And a driver and a driving force behind it. So so we go from people who don't like guns because they don't know them, right? It's just, you got an opinion without a frame of reference. You're stupid. Unfortunately, most people don't have an experience with a gun, right? And so it's just like, so now you've got, like, you know, the have not dones and the dones, and the have not dones are almost outweighing, you know, the people with frame of reference.
There's some historical relevance to this too, in that we have, as you say, as you hear in the military, you know, like 1% of the American population joins the military. And of that 1% of the people who join the Army, 1% of those make it in Ranger Battalion or something like this, and who cares, right? Yeah. But the challenge comes is that you're talking about when it comes to the gun control, gun conversation, it is almost a law, an unwritten law, that if you know what you're talking about, you're excluded from participating. Where
yeah, because that's convenient, because they don't want to be proven. They don't want a light shine on their bullshit.
I think so. I want to go back, before we get into that part. I want to go back to this entrepreneurial character who's running a school that's helping. That's an entrepreneur of entrepreneurs. He's kind of meta, not like the one, but that's pretty interesting, because what he's doing when he says that translates to votes at the ballot boxes, he's not reaching outside of his circle of influence. He's not going, well, you know, if I could convince AOC to change her mind, then I would get a different world. He's like, no, my rule set and my world is this. It might be multi-million-dollar business peoples, but that is my circle. If I try to go to try to change the mind of rural Vermonters who like, you know, who are borderline Amish, I might not have any influence, or something like that, right? Or if it's
I mean, this guy hacked his environment regarding this school so much that he had, like, some of the prerequisites. I don't want to lie to you, but I think the prerequisites were you had to have, you know, owned or sold a business before. You have to, so he knows that you've got some frame of reference, so that narrows the field down.
Yep.
And you have to pay to attend this school, and the incentive for paying to attend this school is you get all of these resources and insight and experiences to processes from this billionaire, right? He's a smart businessman. So you're paying him to get smart, but then at the end of it, like, he's going to cherry pick, and he's going to be like, all right, hey, Forrest, I like your idea. I'm gonna fund you, but I'm gonna need 45% of the company.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not gonna say no. Plus, so he's going through all of this, and then he's like, hey, we're gonna do a week of survival. I mean, we set him up in patrol base, taught him land nav. They had to slaughter their own chicken and prepare it. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty legit. And
you had to be a real boy. Yeah, you had to be a real person.
But you got all these Berkeley types. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they wanted it so bad that they were able to suck it up, shoot a gun, kill a chicken, pluck a chicken, prep a chicken, sleep out in the cold, land nav. You know what I mean? Because so he created an environment where you check the block. Yeah, I want to play this game. And well, there's no
secret that people who have never been in the military idolize all the things that we found really dumb and painful. They're like, oh man, you got to spend a week in the field. And we're like, yeah, we had to spend a week in the field. What are you talking about? I ran out of dip on day 3, and the cold potatoes were not even edible by day 5 or something like that. It's like, okay, man. But
yeah,
I can see that.
Do you want to go camping? I'm like, I was a ranger. Like, I don't want to sleep in the cold on the cold, wet,
Yeah, I don't like camping. The only time that I enjoy camping at all is when it is a means to an end. But if it's like, hey, let's go camping, like, no.
Yeah.
Why? Because
like
there's
glamping, or you know what I mean?
We went camping in the Sahara Desert. We had like a 20-foot by 30-foot tent to ourselves with a shower that had a porcelain, like they brought a porcelain shower out and they attached a tent to it. It's like, that's camping. We had like everywhere we went in the desert had carpet rolled out in front of us. It was fantastic. I could camp like that. Like, we had a queen size bed or a king size bed for my wife and I, and it was a beautiful environment. But like, yeah, because that was cool. But if it's like, oh, let's go into the wilderness, let's go to a campground and
I'll camp if like I'm hunting, right? Like you said, a means to an end, right? Like, all right, I got to get back here, and so I'm just gonna have to suck it up because I want I want the end result more than that outweighs the how much I don't want to camp.
I will do, absolutely. I want to climb this mountain. I will camp to get up the mountain. I 100%. I'm right there with you. But if it's just to camp, no. So
yeah, I don't know. Too many associative memories keep me from doing that. But I should take my own advice and get outside of my comfort zone. Maybe try it again.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out as we go. So, returning back to this, we had the story of the entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. You had your entrepreneurial character who was basically breaking people out of their comfort zone so that they could, and as a further testing, like, okay, not only do you have to prove, I'm going to use arbitrary concepts, but not only do you have to prove that you can make $1 million business in order to even get to the course, but you have to, and that's a challenge in itself. To even get in the course, you have to prove that you can make $1 million business. And then after that, once you've gone through all the hardship of making $1 million business, you need to go suck it up in the woods for a week, which, in the long run, you're like, oh, cool. It took me 5 years to build this business. I'll go hang out in the woods, and it's like, I don't know if I would survive very well. I don't know how I would do. And I think I would be all right. But like, if you're saying, all right, you have to go spend a week at Berkeley or a week in Silicon Valley at Google, just integrating with Google people. I don't know what my life would be like. I wonder if I don't know if there's actually
like a mirror dynamic.
I don't think it is, because one is much more human and primal and the other one's much more artificial and mechanical, but it's not, because people don't go to like coder boot camp the same way they go to like fitness boot camp.
Right. I think like, so I guess where I started off with is like, so that was a long-winded way of saying, okay, there are there are differences, and there are like the people that despise guns because they don't have any frame of reference.
Yep.
That story is like, once they got frame of reference, it was totally demystified. They were converts. So then it's like, okay, well, now you're the newbie gun guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who's already got 2 AR-15s and been to a training course is gonna,
Hopefully take you under their wing.
yeah, but that would be the right answer. But most guys are like, oh, look at this FUD, this weekend warrior, this, whatever, and on and on and on and on and on up the line until you get to the top tier. It's human nature. It's like, the ego keeps us from doing things. It keeps it keeps us, makes you go down, or the ego is responsible for so much bullshit, but a lot of good stuff. You know what I mean? Without
right.
ego, you wouldn't have elite units. But if used in the right way, right? So.
Yeah, well, ego and esprit de corps are at least kissing cousins, which is the best metaphor you can think of. But
right.
Like ego and esprit de corps, or pride in your accomplishment versus arrogance in who you are extremely close. And and we get that. Like when it comes to the newbie and the guy who knows some stuff and whatever, I don't think that people make the evaluations about each other in gun culture based on their status as much as they do how much they pretend their status is other than what it is. And there's a lot of examples of how you could play this out. But when we see somebody who, let's just say, is new is new to gun culture, when we see someone who's new to gun culture, or we see somebody who is new to a subgenre of gun culture, the thing that we evaluate more so is how is their ego aligned with their status. Because if they are a person who is new in the culture but acts like they're seasoned, that's what we don't like. Or somebody who's exerting their authority, or their, not influence, but their authority beyond what their capacity can justify, that's what we have an issue with. So if I see you, and this I think has a little bit to do more with like the maturity of gun culture. If I see you, let's just say I'm the seasoned veteran of the culture. I've been around for 20 years and you've been around for 6 months. I'm expecting you to sort of know your place as a I
don't even know what that. I don't even know where that is.
Exactly, right. And you can run into like
the seasoned guy should recognize that and put your arm around me and say, "Hey," and show me the ropes.
Yeah,
but
I think
we don't.
Well, yeah, I know there's definitely resistance from the top in that sense that, like, I think there are people who don't want to, say, lower their station, or they're too focused on the guy who's above them to think about lifting the guy who's below them. I think there's plenty of people within the unstated hierarchy of the non-military side of gun culture, and I include veterans in this section because we're so focused on trying to aspire for something. Maybe it's just we're looking at somebody who we want to be like. Oh, I'm a YouTuber, I want to be like Garand Thumb. That when somebody below us is like, hey, we kind of stomp them, or we ignoring isn't the right term, because there's a lot of information that's translated, like, when you're doing that deliberately. But so from the top down,
there's a large tendency
mm-hmm.
to misdirect, put down, put in its place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like those are like, I've been teaching firearms for, I don't know, 15 years, I've seen the vast majority of it all. And,
okay.
and with 20 students twice a month for years, right? You just by volume, you see a lot of different shit. And
mm-hmm.
there's a common thread. Everybody pulls up at the start of the class thinking the same thing. They're nervous They don't know how they rate to the next guy. They don't want to be the worst on the line, and so on and so on. And so being around that enough, when I show up, I immediately start cracking jokes.
Yeah.
And it basically puts everybody's subconscious at ease. And then I call it out before we even get started. I'm like, look, who here is, wants to, you paid the money, you made the travel arrangements because you want to get better, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Then, and that's like everybody else, right? So like, I even had, this guy was, I remember specifically, this guy was just getting inside of his own head because he was so nervous about what everybody else was going to think about him that he was screwing it up. And so finally, like, I stopped everything and I was just like, how many of you guys are watching how well he's shooting? And they're like, no, I'm worried about my shit. And I'm like, see?
Right.
Now you can get on with your day and perform because they don't give a shit how well you shoot.
Yeah. It's on you, dude. Yeah, it's on you. Like, now you know that no one here is sitting and going, oh, I shot my group. Now I'm going to watch you. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's ego, right? And so, I've had people show up at my courses that are way better shooters than I am. I don't get butthurt about it. I just, it's like, all right, well, I'm a good shooter, but I'm an even better instructor. I'm able to communicate an idea maybe 3 different ways depending on how you take in information, right? Mm-hmm. So I've built this process and streamlined it so that it is all accommodating depending on if you're a guy who likes a challenge or if you're a guy who's meek and kind of nervous, and you know what I mean. So I know I have enough check. I have my ego in enough check that, I'm like, okay, yeah, you're better than me. Now, that's just like I will take a class from anybody. If nothing else, I'll learn what not to do.
Yeah, I think
more frame of reference is always better. Yeah,
I definitely can see how. Well, I mean, yeah, the idea. I don't know. I'd find it hard to have an opportunity. I'd find it hard to be in a position where if I took a course, it would be a waste of time. That's a very difficult place to be.
Right. And I was just saying, I tend to speak in absolutes when it's maybe not the case across the board, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, don't get me wrong. I have attended courses where I left going, I probably wouldn't pay for that, but. But I am not the normal use case, and I completely recognize that because the positions that I've held in the past and the opportunities that I've had the opportunity to sort of field test more courses, which sounds like a humble brag, and it's fine, but it's not like I didn't walk away with something. And a good example would have been like there was a course I took once where the teacher was newer at teaching, but he was a good dude. And there were some subjects where I had a hard time figuring it out, but, and this was a couple of years ago now. And it's like, but the issue being I was sloppy. I could tell where I had gotten sloppy, and it wasn't his teaching, but the fact that that I was at the course that I identified like, oh, wow, I had really gotten sloppy at this set of movements. And so now I had, so I can correct that and whatever. And so, yeah, top-down ego is certainly an issue, and bottom-up ego is another one, where the top-down is this, like, I don't have time for everybody attitude, and everyone, like, no one I know who has that survives long. You're setting a timer on your relevancy. The bottom-up ego is also a challenge where you're not willing to put your ego aside to say, okay, I'm plateauing here. I actually need to go to somebody and have them fix it. And I don't want to do that. Yep. And so I'll make all of my justifications, just like I'll make all of my justifications not to meet my neighbor. And I'll make all the justifications not to go to the event. That now I have a really, really, really well-written list of examples of why I shouldn't do the thing that will allow me to move on and get integrated and have a community. And you will die a very, very, very well-scripted, lonely man.
Yep.
So
telling yourself all the same stories.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Or no stories because you avoided all of the story events, the things that created stories.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
Some people can't hack it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I mean, I hate to sound like a cliche, but it's balance and everything, right?
Fair.
I can't. Everything that we have talked about, right, is utilizing some sort of balance and knowing where that middle point is, right? And if you don't know where the middle point is because you haven't explored how, either end, you're not going to be inclined to know where the middle point is and to and have an accurate balance, if you will.
Okay, yeah. So before you try to if you can't figure out what balance feels like, it means you need to explore more. That's a short answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you don't know something about a subject and you formulate an opinion, like, I mean,
it's a self-correcting error. You will find your place, and it will be at the fringe.
Well, but I'm not. There once was a time that that was the case, but I think in society now, it's like, if they'll just cancel you instead of engaging and building their frame of reference. Nope, you're not. You're saying something that goes against what me and my group are saying. So we're gonna do everything to cancel you, or you know what I mean. So it's that dad can't bring the neighborhood boys home to their father because that father was like, you know what I mean? Like it's over time, people have shifted where, a cop could like rough me and my brother up, on the hood or scare us. And then he'd take us to our dad as a kind of a get out of jail free. Here's a lesson card. You know what I mean? But there were enough parents that like saw an opportunity to get back at those cops. So it's the whole dynamic is changing.
Yeah, well, I think that's a short-lived phenomenon. Like this is a bit of optimism when it comes to gun culture in America writ large. I'm actually a little bit more optimistic. The cancel culture people have already set an egg timer on their value, and once they're done, once that timer dings, there will be no redemption for you. Like we see the whole thing right now of you're starting to see it within the media, or you saw it within media of like people saying we need like COVID amnesty or whatever. Like, trust me when I say this, if you are that person who is like, I'm going to demonize every element of you and try to cancel you because of some sort of thing, like I don't mean to be crass, but like you made your bed, now sleep in it. And the cancel culture thing is kind of the same thing. Like, if I am more afraid of being canceled by people that I don't know than doing what I think is important for my community, then you've already sort of selected yourself out of the future's pool of useful people. And what I think is helpful in our community and especially even in gun culture itself is that we've changed our attitude of waiting for somebody to fix us and started saying, I'm going to focus on my own circle and what I can do here. And when it comes to right here,
yeah, right now,
what is my community and what can I participate in and where can I help, as opposed to who do I need to elect to fix my problems? The cancel culture thing is going to kill itself out. It cannot survive.
No, I agree. I mean, look, we're just seeing cancel culture is specific to us in the 7 cycles of civilization, right?
Sure.
But
the 7 cycles of civilization does not need to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, it doesn't need to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't need to wait for the world to collapse to build my community.
No, I mean, so if we become aware of what we're doing and the dynamic, and we can keep ourselves in a phase longer, versus if we do nothing, it's just going to continue to devolve, right? It's like the hard times create strong men create easy times easy. Okay, so that's easy.
Stress out generation theory. Yep.
Yep. So, I mean, that's a shorter way of basically summing up kind of 7 cycles of civilization, right? Where it's just a rinse and repeat. And, we are in weak men are making hard times. Now, I don't know if it's deliberate. I don't know if the choices are a byproduct of their experiences because their lives have been just so easy. I don't know if it's just massive idiocy, a snowball. It's just gained enough momentum that everybody's just like, all right, well, we gotta get on
madness.
But we're starting with innovative guys, with smart guys that are thinking outside of the box and don't buy the narrative. A big power move. Elon just bought Twitter, and he's like, you know what I mean? It's and then the White House, put out a tweet yesterday that was like, Social Security checks are up, X% more than they've ever been, and then Twitter fact checked it and was just like, that's because of inflation. Actually, the actual value of the dollar that they got was lower.
Yeah,
because it doesn't go as far. And I'm like, so there's starting to be some momentum, pulled back in the other direction, and that's because smart guys who are thinking outside of the box are putting stuff in upstream.
Yeah, I think so, especially in the sense of it's that instead of saying that people need to be free thinkers, because my opinion about the phrase I need to be a free thinker, I need to think for myself, is a sign of functional illiteracy. Usually it's just a popular thing to say. No one's going to go and say, well, I'm just a groupthink guy. No one's going to go and say people just need to do what they're told. They don't need to think for themselves. They just need to think what they're told. No one's going to say that. Everyone is going to say, we live in the post-Enlightenment era. Everyone's going to say, we need to think for ourselves. We need to be free thinkers and whatever. And you're like, well,
but you
what
can
is
say
that?
And doing it and executing it is two different things. So
Absolutely.
You can say that all day long, but if you're not self-aware of what you're saying and have enough frame of reference for both ways, then you're just,
So we took a quick break for whatever reason we want to use as an explanation right now. But Garett, we were talking about, we've had this kind of greater conversation distill around ideas that were, as you were saying, part philosophy on how we think about things, and part culture, and part this kind of veteran civilian interaction. And I think I want to spend as we were saying in our little break section, how we're going to conclude this is we're going to start driving into the environment that we live in, both socially and politically, and the direction we as a gun culture are heading, can continue to head in a good direction, and what winning looks like, especially when it's in a political sense and also a cultural sense. So you were talking about, there's a consistency within our environment that the language of gun culture when it comes to politics and voting is basically one of two things. You're either in support of gun control, or you're watching our position be eroded away by constant concession. So it's Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the incremental boiling of the frog, right? And we as humans have an inherent capability to adjust to our environment. So take COVID, for example. Pretty soon, everybody got used to just staying in their house, conditioned to wear a mask everywhere. That was the vast majority. So humans have a really good ability at adapting. So when people start incrementally infringing on that line, right? You're like, oh, that stings. And we bitch to our friends and our peers. But then we ultimately get used to it. And then they do it again. And then they do it again. And so, and we were talking about, on the break, we're 2 generations away from not having firearms anymore.
If that.
Because, Yeah,
It might be
I mean,
shorter.
at most, right? If something doesn't turn around, I mean, because they just keep keep moving the line, and we keep getting used to it, and there's going to come a point where it's like, okay, you can no longer grandfather your weapons to your next of kin in a trust or whatever. Like, and we'll be so used to that new norm that won't be an egregious infraction, right? And then it's gone, and now you have no ability to you are completely dependent on the machine to take care of you.
Yep.
You
So
can't
yeah,
argue with it. You can't. I mean, you're. Yeah.
yeah, you've. If we're in a position where we cannot say, maybe we can distill into a little bit deeper on like exactly what the idea of the concept of firearms and ownership mean, is that the very fact that you can be in possession of something as simple as an AR-15, which again is like it's not a fighter jet, it's not a nuclear bomb, it's not a laser death cannon, but the very fact that you can be in possession of it, and the government or the tyrant, whatever it is, the petty tyrant, doesn't know about it, is itself inherently a deterrent against tyranny. And in some ways, it's actually a way of loving your neighbor, as weird as it sounds, because it provides a check to their unmitigated ego or their unmitigated tyranny.
Yeah, and there's a flip side of that coin where, let's say you have the ability, like, let's say your neighbor's getting carjacked in their driveway. If you go down and stop that, well, you know what I mean? That's the upside, right? They say an armed society is a polite society, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think, encapsulates what we're trying to get at, because, we see stuff all the time now where it's like guys are just walking in, loading up, stuff and walking out of the store with it, because they know nobody's going to push back on them, because we have made it too many times the guys who are trying to do the right thing get in trouble, so that you disincentivize them from stopping it, and then it's just chaos rolling out of control. But I have seen some pushback start to happen, in that, where it was like one guy intervened on, I saw a video where one guy intervened on this guy running out with a bunch of stuff, and that was like the second guy intervened, and all of a sudden the dynamic shifted for this person that was trying to walk out with all these goods. So, I mean, it's, it's sad to say, but most people have a sheep mentality, in that they're not brave enough to do the thing that they know is right. But if they see somebody else go first, they'll jump right on.
Okay. And the metaphor of like the sheepdog wolf thing is a little bit overplayed.
No, I'm not. Yeah. I mean, it's it can
be, I'm sorry, it just can be oversimplified, like, or it can be an oversimplification. Right. And like, and so I don't want to use that one, but I get the concept of like, not everyone is a self-starter, right? And as much as that, or not everyone will act with that sort of agency in a scenario like that. And that's all that I'm not saying. I don't care about I'm trying to find a word. The moral evaluation of that is irrelevant at this time. But what it does come to a conclusion of, let's just say you come to the conclusion that you're surrounded by people who fit this category of sheep. That does not abdicate you of the responsibility of acting. Even if my neighbor is not willing to, I don't know. There's a certain limit of that one. Like,
handle it for themselves.
Handle it for themselves, right? If unless my neighbor has come out and said they're a legitimate pacifist, not a weak abdicating pacifist where you just export that responsibility to somebody else. Like, newsflash: if you're a pacifist and you call the cops, you're a liar. You're not a pacifist. You're just exporting that responsibility to somebody else.
Well, a lot of these opinions, people haven't really thought deeply enough about their own opinions that they have. They just subscribe to an ideology. I mean, I used to live in a neighborhood where we had a 4th of July get together or whatever, and she was like, oh, you're in the military, and I was like, yeah. She's like, yeah, I'm a pacifist, and I was like, oh, and I was polite, but I was just like, well, if somebody pulled in and grabbed your son right now, what would you do? She's like, well, I'd try and stop him. I'm like, how? I took her down that thought track where she really had to question, oh shit, maybe I'm not a pacifist, because I do care enough about things in this world, her son, that she would be willing to do anything and everything to get him back. Well, it's like you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth within 5 minutes to me, lady.
Exactly. Yeah. I have encountered, and I know of a person or some people who are what I'd refer to as like strong pacifists. And what they are is that they recognize the ramifications of their decision to the extent that if they were being attacked in their home, they would not call somebody else to do violence on their behalf. And they've made that commitment enough where it's like, okay, I can respect that to the extent that you're at least consistent. But if you're going to say I'm a pacifist until somebody attacks me, you're not a pacifist.
You're just a good human.
I mean, yeah.
Well, you're not starting shit, but you're down to, finish it within if enough things of importance are on the line.
Yeah, but that position, I mean, I guess I could say that I can understand the concession of it saying it as a good human. I think of it more as the like, well, I'm not actually being violent. I'm just defending myself, and it's like that's violent.
Yeah.
Okay, like
there's too much of society likes to put themselves on these moral high grounds because they live in a fake world. They live in a world where they are totally protected. Totally, there's really. I mean, like I was saying, it's like being dumb is either painful or expensive, right? And when you nerf the world, and when a bad decision doesn't hurt, because you minimize, you nerf the reaction, you're creating a disingenuous environment.
You're creating a weak environment, absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think
a false environment, and that's where you get these kids that are like running off at the mouth and saying just the most aggressive, profane stuff, and it's just like, dude, you're about 5 minutes worth. You know what I mean? If that.
Yeah.
Like what has your life experiences brought you to where you've never got punched in the mouth? Because clearly you have not. You're talking to a big dude screaming, with your blue hair in his face. It's like, I don't know. I don't want to.
No, I get that.
Far, but.
No, not at all. I get the point. I get the point in the sense of there's a sort of like cruel irony, right? Of when you throw a Molotov cocktail and you do not think that you should be treated as a domestic terrorist. Yeah. When you try to burn down a building and you're like, oh, I'm just defending myself from fascism or whatever. It's like, okay, dude. Yeah.
That's just your justification. Yeah.
It's just your justification, right? It's just I've read plenty of your literature. I understand how this works. You're creating you live in a fictional universe where you're suddenly like the Jedi, and you're like, oh, you're fighting against the evil, and you have, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, but you have more in common with the crackpot conspiracy theorist than you do with Einstein or some rational being.
Yeah.
That can be created. That can be created in a world where there are no consequences. If you create a world where there are no consequences, you will get people who deny reality.
Yeah.
I think there's a darker side to it too, though, because people who the lack of consequences also cause men who are looking to live in a world of consequences to lose hope and sanity.
Well, and I think that's partially what we're seeing, right? Is we're, there's cause and effect, right? And the further advanced our society gets in these 7 cycles of civilization, right? It becomes an artificial where it's like the cause and effect, the the effect doesn't have as sharp as an edge. And
Okay.
so, when you run into, when you make a decision and it is painful, that, it is painful for you because that's the wrong one. That's a good data point. But if it's not as painful for you, and I'm not talking physical, I mean, some could do it physically, or some could, financially, or whatever, right?
Emotionally,
Yeah.
ethically. I mean, you
Yeah.
can think about how you treat your spouse.
Yeah. So we live in a nerf society. Like, I mean, I have the opinion we live in a nerf society, and so then you get these people that are coming up in this nerf society, which we're dealing with polar opposites, right? We're dealing with guys that have been, you and I have been deployed. We've seen kind of the best and worst of humanity at both extremes, and then you've got the loud minority who have grown up in this nerfed environment that have all of this opinion but no frame of reference, and and there's momentum, and so we're dealing with the absolutes. Like, I've been there, seen that, done that, experienced it. I hold myself to a sharp edge standard, if you will, and so when the momentum of this starts to overtake, it's like, okay, boys, like we gotta rally and get this shit back into homeostasis.
Yeah, I think so. Let's kind of work towards what do you mean by homeostasis? Because I think I understand, but I don't. This is where we start kind of making assumptions and then running alongside. I think a version of homeostasis in our culture would be if you commit a crime where the punishment fits the crime, where people are not made political prisoners for having wrongthink, at the same time that people who commit domestic terrorism are permitted to run for office.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, another example of it would be, this sounds kind of odd, but like kind of the reverse of Leninism, where if you have the ethical fiber that has produced in you the lifestyle of committing chaos in a city and expecting not to be held accountable for it, you will find yourself on the fringes in the basement of society. And so that everyone else can get along and get on with building a better system and a better economy and a better medical and a better, whatever. Yeah. Where I think that would be, a form of homeostasis is where young men are not growing up nihilistic, thinking that there is no correlation between cause and effect, or at least having no kind of connection to that. Those are some things that I think are homeostasis.
Yeah, I mean, we are, in my mind, homeostasis would be like, I'm not going to infringe on your ability to have a firearm.
Okay.
Now, right? So I'm not messing with your stuff, right? Now, I could not have a firearm, and and that would be a homeostasis. You want a gun, you got it. You don't want a gun, okay, you got it. Nobody's forcing you to have one. Okay, That would be a homeostasis. But then the argument comes up, well, we just need to get rid of all the guns. Well, no, because then only the criminals have guns, and you're leaving everybody, a sitting target to both tyranny and crime.
Yep. And what's the difference between a disarmed society and a slave population?
Right. But
time.
Right. And so, most people can't get past that thought. And the talking heads want to drill so down into the weeds about, it's this many rounds or this many rounds, or it's a brace or it's a stock. It's like, dude, like you're getting distracted. This is like this.
I think that's
you distracted and divided because they don't want you looking at the big picture problems.
Yeah, well, I think the issue, I think it's a feature, not a bug, that the people who are making laws about what is considered an assault rifle don't have the first idea of what they're talking about. I don't think that's an accident. We had this Sandy Hook happened. A whole bunch of political people made a whole bunch of statements about assault weapons and ghost guns and whatever. And it turns out that everyone who had ever used one of those in any professional manner was not allowed to be a part of the conversation. And then they made all these statements that were like the 30-round magazine clip caliber bullet thing. And then they were mocked incessantly until they got pushed into a corner, because the Sandy Hook, the 2013 into 2012 into 2013 big firearms ban push completely fell flat. The arguments that were made were all terrible arguments. They were not grounded in reality, and like whatever. But the problem is that those people who made those statements didn't shut up. They crawled into a hole, and then now, when it's politically convenient again for them to come out, they're saying the exact same things, completely ignoring the fact that they were caricatured. They were they were corrected so clearly in public by people that said that's not a thing. That is literally not a thing. Like and the problem is that those people who push forward these bills can tell you that the sky is made out of Play-Doh and the moon is actually an alien satellite that's consisted entirely of diarrhea or whatever. And people go, oh, well, they're not correct, but we'll let them make the decisions on it anyway. And
yeah, it's almost like they're dumbing down the populace intentionally. So like going back, like, our forefathers, if you got a bunch of books back there, they were able to articulate in big concepts with very crisp, powerful words.
yes.
Like, we don't speak like that today. If I were to compare how they wrote and spoke to how we speak today, we all think that, we're smarter. We are definitely dumber in the literature department, right? Like in the ability to communicate an idea and articulate a complex idea as gracefully and with few words as possible. Every word in there packs a wallop, right? And so, I think they are. I mean, there's all these people that interview these like kids at college, and they ask them, what are the continents? And they're like, Nevada. And it's just like, you know what I mean? Or like
the man on the street interviews. I'm very familiar. And then,
it's just like, these guys are walking oxymorons. You know what I mean? It's like you're.
It's amazing that if it wasn't for the society around you, you would literally die of starvation because you refuse to feed yourself.
Because it's been nerfed.
Mm-hmm. So
the society has been nerfed. The sting has been taken out of the effect of the choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, the consequences have been all muted, and the safety net has risen so high that you can effectively fail upwards. Like some people do that. Right? I mean, we've even what was it? There was there's like a project called like the New Information Project or whatever. I can't remember the name of it, but it came out recently, and it was a supposed think tank that was caught, and this is what they were doing. They were caught creating fake Russian Twitter bots and using those fake Russian Twitter profiles to follow and support conservatives. And then they turned around and blamed those conservatives for being supported by Russians.
Yeah, it's a misinformation, disinformation campaign.
Right? And so like this, and so the issue with that person, though, is that what are the consequences for that person? And any moral society would say, cool, you're barred from any intellectual practice whatsoever. You're barred from the academies, you're barred from journalism, you're barred from government, you're barred from education, you're barred from medicine.
That's how it should go.
It should go. And it shouldn't be like maybe even if it isn't a legal law, everyone should know who you are and go, you're untouchable. Or
here's the thing. The last infraction is consistently outshined by the new infraction, right? So it's like,
okay,
oh, Jeffrey Epstein, oh, fucking Russian collusion, oh, right? Like as soon as you're starting to get a handle on it, it's like, oh, like new bright thing. So it's just this full auto barrage of like all of this shit. It's like, luckily there are people that are in the woodworks that like, okay, I'm going to make this issue my personal mission. And that's when somebody's been chasing that infraction down and brought it back up and say, hey, you remember this? Well, now there's been justice, right? So, man, it's, I don't know.
I think that nails down a pretty good point too, because when it comes to, I think that nails down a pretty good point because when it comes to like people, there are people can have opinions about a subject, but then there are also people who have influence in the subject. I think is another way of saying it. It's not the right word. Maybe skin in the game is the right word. They're let's take like the Ukrainian conflict as an example. Like there's a lot of people who have opinions about the Ukrainian conflict, but there are not very many people who have the same skin in the game. Some people are there, some people are not there. Some people have influence over governments, some people do not. Some people are I think in some of that way, you know, we've kind of, American culture has made looking like you think you know what you're talking about as a form of social hierarchy or value, and law at the expense of having skin in the game on the subject that you're talking about.
Well, think about the level of effort for those two items. It's easy to talk and not be about it versus being about it and then saying it, right? So it's just the picking of the easier path, which humans inherently do. So, and especially with social media and all these different platforms, I mean, anybody can, start a platform. You got to be unique and different. And so you got to say some, the easy button would be to say some controversial shit, you know what I mean? Just to kind of initiate the fire, if you will.
Oh, he said this.
And then I'm the leader of the chaos movement, right? Or you know what I mean? Or whatever my specific thing is. And so,
but what's the long tail goal? What's the long tail benefit? Like, I don't
think half the people even know.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we're on this subject, which is like kind of the big meta conversation that's going on right now. This is one of the reasons why we've talked about community so much. And sometimes some of us will find ourselves in a scenario where we get to have a conversation with somebody and change their mind. Some of us will be in a scenario where we can have influence over somebody. How do you, I think in some ways you hear a lot of people, whether they're like politicos or whatever, spend a lot of time talking about you need to vote local and pay attention to what's in your environment or right? Which there's a little bit of like, okay, why don't you do that? But you're talking about national politics all the time. And I get it. There's a ecosystem, it layers itself out.
Yeah. It's think globally, act locally, right?
Yes. So
you got to be aware of the big picture, but you can only affect what you can affect within your sphere of influence. So that would be the action part would be locally within your, 525 meter.
Yes, absolutely. And so there is a solution to the chaos, the looming chaos of the world, and that is to make order in your backyard.
Yep.
That is to make order in your backyard. There is solution to the global problem is on the community level.
Yeah, and I think you are amongst more friendlies than you are foes. You just need, I live in a really liberal area, so I've got all my stuff, and I was very careful about how I was getting it into the house, and right, because I didn't know, living in a liberal area. Well, at that Halloween party, I was surprised at how many like veterans were in my neighborhood, how many more conservative, more like oh, you should see my arsenal. I'm like, I was so surprised. I had this preconceived notion, but once I pulled back the veil, I found myself amongst more friendlies than I did foes.
Mm-hmm. And pick your battles. Right. You will run into people who are beyond your reach, maybe beyond your influence. I'm not saying beyond salvation. That's not the point. They're beyond your influence, and that's okay. There are some people
Yeah.
you will not be able to influence, and that's just the nature of the world. Thankfully, there's like 7 billion of us on this planet.
But I think that there are more friendlies, more like, so the you hear about like the loud minority, right?
Absolutely, yep.
It's a small amount of people making the biggest ruckus, and then it's like, oh, I don't want to be ostracized against the popular narrative, right? So I'm just not going to voice. I'm just going to quiet myself down. But when you pull back that veil, you realize, holy shit, there's a lot of people that are being quiet just like me, but have the same values and ideals that I do. And it's like, you don't, uh, you don't, you'll never crack the door if you're not willing to, like, you'll never see what's on the other side unless you're willing to crack the door.
It takes courage to be willing to take the first step, and that's okay. That's a good thing to do. Like, if you are isolated, then go reach out. It's better to be embarrassed and try to figure it out than it is to continue to be isolated. 100%.
Yeah. Or Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Right.
Fair.
And I apply that a lot across a lot of stuff in my life. Right. It's like, I can convince myself that this is this environment, but I can remove all doubt and kick the door open and be like, oh shit, this is a great surprise. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. When we're looking towards restoring, let's just say restoring, I don't want to say restoring order. How do you if you, the world
That's
will
what
not
it is,
do
though. That's what it is, though.
The world, so we cannot count on the people that are trying to nerf the world. We cannot count on them to change their mind and de-nerf the world.
No.
And so, like, if you're the same thing with the whole gun control thing is like the people who have committed their lives to the anti-intellectual approach of gun control or the slavers approach of gun control. Because I don't really see much of a intellectual difference when it comes to how governments perceive their people, right? Because you can make the argument that a government which has disarmed its population but not entirely enslaved them, even if they never do it, they still treat their population as serfs. They still treat their populations as property of the government.
It's human nature. You have to have a lot of restraint to be in a position of power and not abuse it. Like you have to be a very well aware person to hold some power and use it with good discretion. But you got all these, all they want is power, and they want to exert their power over people, and they want to see how far they can push you into the corner of their will. And but I think it's a there's a false it's a false environment. Like I test, in all different parts of my life, and I'm constantly surprised by how many people think like I do. So I'm like, where the hell are these? And they all seem to have purple hair and are living in Portland. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean,
sure.
I hate to paint with broad brushstrokes here, but
Portland. I mean, okay, let's understand the generalization. Like if you said, "Oh, white guy, beard, tattoos, he must be like a Ranger veteran," I'd be like, "Oh, yeah. Whatever." I'm not gonna throw a fit about it. Oh, he's a veteran. How'd you know? White beard, tattoos, black t-shirt, blue jeans. Like, you got me.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Like I went to SHOT Show once, and you could tell everyone who came out of Ranger Battalion because they were all wearing Chucks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all of them. This was like 2015, and like you could tell a guy's branch by what they were wearing. SEALs had perfect hair, Rangers had Chucks and sleeves, and Marines had tan pants and high and tights. That was like the year for those things, and there were exceptions to the rule, but it was funny.
Well, it's funny like when you get into like marketing, it's like we all dress in a clothing that represents how we want to be perceived by others. So that would be, it's like oh, the Ranger's got a look. I'm going to dress according to that look and represent, my tribe in this mix of multiple tribes, right? And so,
Yeah, I mean, you can look at you and I now. We're both wearing black T-shirts with white logos. So, like,
yeah.
do I hate it? No. Is it funny? Yes. So,
I mean, it's as much as we are all unique, individuals. Going back to like, I mean, there's not too many. We're not too many degrees different once you look at the big picture.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
I have found some comfort and enjoyment in meeting people who I would have otherwise thought were different that are very similar.
I enjoy the opposite. I enjoy talking to somebody that I've already have a preconceived notion on, and they're smart and able to articulate and work through ideas, and then so we open the door, and I have this preconceived notion. I go in, I'm like, holy shit! Like, we had a conversation that was very enlightening, and now I know why this person has these reasons. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, some of that is why that is some of the reasons why we started this program is because I think my contribution to culture building is the translation of ideas through a show. That's what I can do. That's what I have to offer right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I definitely can agree with you in the sense of as frustrating as it comes down to looking at the world and saying like our gun rights are being tread on very consistently. I am an optimist in that, like, I think the next generation of Americans will either be stripped of their arms and it'll be the end of any sort of free society entirely, or we'll start seeing a curtailing of the ATF and the NFA. And on our generation, if we set the standard and we say, like, I don't need to justify to somebody who's already decided their position and they're unwilling to move, that I don't need to justify anything to somebody who's like let's just say like a Maxine Waters, who probably doesn't have the emotional character to try to understand someone who would be opposed to her position or even what she's supporting in general. It's not as much of an important point for me to determine whether she's being a tyrant or she's just being whatever. What really matters is that the antidote is the same. It's the people coming together and saying, nah, we're not going to be a part of this. We did it. Gun culture is following in the same shoes that we did, is that, like, you can make braces illegal. Who's gonna care?
Yeah, and the point of like everybody that everybody sees that for what it is, right? I mean, if we're being honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the people that enacted that, it's just like, I mean, you got these uneducated, uninformed people passing on legislation that they don't even know that they're fucked up.
At some point in time, you bear moral responsibility for being that wrong.
I know, but until we hold them accountable, right? So we're getting some pushback on different agencies, right? And I think that it's good, and I think like we can. There's going to be some inherent pushback, both in gun culture and, like, I'm already seeing my son and his friends, they got so weird for so long that my son and his friends are just like, nah, that's whack. You know what I mean? Like, they're starting to go the opposite way of the narrative, right? And I see they're starting to get momentum going the other way, just because they realize on its face it's just ludicrous, right?
So your son and his friends are looking at the sort of the redefinitions and the way that that gun control is trying to be presented, and they're saying that the brace thing, the world at writ large.
So the world at large, right? So
okay.
Case in point, you've got all this transgender stuff being pushed out here, and then it was the furries. I don't even know what a furry was, but it was basically little kids in junior high and high school dressing up like animals because they identify as an animal, right? And so
I'm pretty sure it started as young adults dressing up in anthropomorphized costumes of fake animals, or I'm sorry, human looking animals, so they could have sex with each other. Like it was originally like a really creepy thing. It wasn't like, oh, we're into this weird stuff. It's like, let's go put on costumes and then so the fact that trickled down to children is really concerning.
Well, I know the origin, but it has morphed, right? And then now it's an identified thing, right? And so the point where I was trying to go with that was, my son and his friends see that how ludicrous it is on its face, and so they started wearing American flags, standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, having good old-fashioned respect, bringing kind of the morality back, and not they don't mess with anybody, but there's definitely two schools of thought where there's like people wearing flags, of LGBTQ, blah, blah, whatever, and then there's people that are wearing American flags, like capes. And you know what I mean? I'm like, this is going on in his school. So there's this inherent kind of recalibrating of the environment. And then if we can add into that, not just going heads up, warring with those who will never convince, but rather who are the people that are on the fringe, and how do you set an example for them, create a tribe for them, bring them into a tribe, show them your culture. That, coupled with the natural events being brought back into homeostasis, conjoined with this tactful approach on how to get people to get in our boat. I think that will even it out quicker.
Yeah, provide something of value to your community, so much so that they can't not want to be a part of it. I think that's a really good part about it. Yeah. It's a really easy, like, pick your boat. Do you want to be in a community that looks out for each other, where I'm like, hey, your son skinned his knee, I bandaged it, he's good to go? Or do you want to be like, this is what we provide to our community, whatever that is? We don't judge, except for we do, and we don't judge except for we have a perpetual witch hunt for whoever doesn't say the current thing loud enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's why I think that stuff burns itself out. Like, it will die. It cannot survive. It survives on the blood. It's the same thing with communism. Communism survives on the blood of others. Once it's out of blood, it just kills itself. It can't live. And so you don't argue with a communist. You force him to be a communist. Okay, cool. Sell your goods, sell everything you have, give it all to charity, live on the government dime, do what the government tells you, do what you're told, don't have an idea, don't think for yourself. And then they're like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to have all the benefits of a capitalist society, but without any of the responsibilities. And the answer is no. No, you cannot have your cake and eat it too.
Well, and that just goes to show they haven't done their due diligence on going down the rabbit hole like the pacifist lady, right?
Yeah, they don't want to. Like, why would you? It demands something of you. You have
a lofty ideology that you agree with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when the reality, it's like ideology meets reality, right? They ideologically agree with this thing until they get to the reality of it, and they're like, oh, whoa. It's like, okay, well, you brought us here. You didn't have to bring us here. Mm-hmm. Like, there is a way out, but we just got to, I think.
Yeah, it's the classic example
of experience enough pain, right?
Yeah. It's the classic example of the rioter who's like, I'm getting ready to, like, throw a Molotov cocktail at somebody and his face melts, right? Or something happens. It's like, hey, dude, like, you opened this can of worms. And you can't claim that it was unjust that somebody hit you in the face with a beanbag.
Yeah.
Because it's like you put gasoline in a bottle or whatever you did. You put a rag in it. You lit it on fire. You picked a target and you threw it at it. Like, it's not an unjust society. The fact that you're alive, well, actually it might be because you're still alive or something like that. But I think there's a correction to that. And I think it also comes into, like, when you're talking about your community, there are limitations of what we think is acceptable, but like, where do you want your children to live? Do you want your children to live in a world where anything goes and none of it matters, or that like there are rules? You play in the rules, and the benefit you get from the rule set is a sense of meaning. Yeah. That you're working in an environment, you're building a community.
And I think we need more guys stepping up and setting the tone that other people want to get behind, right? But maybe aren't willing to put themselves out there, but want to get behind. I mean, I was driving in downtown Portland and last year, and I saw this naked man. He was, his pants were around his knees. He was hugging a pillow. He was, and I was like, whoa, okay. And in the next block up, I saw a family of 5, 3 little kids walking the other way. And I'm like, in about a minute, there's going to be some life-altering stuff happening.
Someone's going to, yeah.
Right? And so, but it's Portland, so the dad will probably cover his people's eyes and nobody will say anything to this person. But like, I thought back, like if somebody was doing that when I was growing up, my dad and my uncles would have drug him into an alley and taught him a lesson. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe
they would have at least moved them out of the way. It doesn't mean like
no, they would have beat him up.
Okay, well, there you go.
Let's just be real. I mean, but here's the thing: is like I've seen people like acting crazy, and everybody's like, oh shit, like don't But then like this crazy person like bangs on the guy's car window, and the guy pulls out a pistol, and all of a sudden he's not crazy anymore. He's like, oh shit, it's like
yeah. There is independence
from nerf reality decision making to here's a sharp edge. You know what I mean? I'm going to get my shit together right now and walk away from this situation.
And within a legal system, what that looks like is you don't punish the people for doing what is right. And our system is very much so oriented towards, you can talk about criminal reform all day long. The short line to criminal reform is stop criminalizing the people who are stopping it.
Yep.
It's a really short answer. Like, I think about this with special operations dudes. I probably have a roster of 100 dudes who are like, if you told me that I could spend the next 6 months of my life doing nothing but going after human trafficking problems, they would do it. Many of them for charity, right? But the issue that they're facing is that they're not. It's not that they're going to deal with the hardship of, say, the organizations or the people that do it. It's that they will go to prison.
Yep.
If they're not, and I'm not saying they'll go to prison for doing anything violent. It'll be like, it's like, oh, what you're doing is considered illegal for some reason. You'll go to prison, and somebody will jam you up in the courts, and you'll find yourself very quickly in a very tough place. And so,
and that is literally I think where we went off the tracks, right? Where people were kept from correcting in their society, right? Like instead of it just being like your moral compass, right? Mm-hmm. Like for me, I know where my moral compass is, regardless of what the law says. I know what my moral compass says, because the law has flip flopped all over the place with alcohol and what you name it, right? Mm-hmm. So that just tells me there's a tonal shift over time, but and you can't always be right and true to yourself and true to your moral compass, right? And so you can't serve two masters. So I know where my moral compass is, and and if somebody's when you get these DAs or you get these
very clear, yeah,
DAs,
or judges,
or they get so focused on wanting to get their win. And they wordsmith things in a way where it's like the person who is actually doing the right thing is now punished because this clever person who didn't really realize he was going to be degrading society by getting this guy off, right? It's just we get so it's like the cops who are, well, I'm just doing my job, man. No, you're not. Like you're
No,
violating, you're rationalizing it because you need to take home food to your family. And so
I understand that you have to take food to your family. I understand it. The short-term benefit you're getting is not worth the long-term loss.
That's easier than getting another job. And so picking the easy route is 99% of the time they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to like the judges thing too, we can look at a lot of issues of like there are no recourse of grievances, and there are some examples where this can be solved. Is that like when the Kyle Rittenhouse thing went down? Is that the people there? You had the issue with Kyle Rittenhouse, which there are ethical questions to be raised in general, but like specifically speaking, his acts of self-defense, the very idea that the state brought a case against him puts the state in a position of moral dubiousness. It does, because like, or even the people who even the people who brought claims against him, it's like, hey, you saw the evidence, you saw what was there. You're not.
Everybody's trying to get a selfish win. What can I sue for? What can
an ideological win, or it's not considered rioting because my tribe did it. Like, watch how far that goes, and you will find yourself in a loincloth with a spear very quickly.
Yep, I watched all these major cities devolve, and you've got these just people that don't get it. It's like, man.
No, they get it. They just like it. It's good to them. Watching your neighborhood light on fire while I sit in my little ivory tower high rise or my ideological protectorate is a win for some people, and that's the thing that needs to be concerning.
Well, no, so, I think about like a different lens where, I go into Portland and it looks like Gotham City. I mean, last time I was down there, probably 2 weeks ago, there was a guy who, was basically defecating on the sidewalk, hid behind my truck to clean himself up. And then 5 minutes later, there was a guy smoking something on some foil walking by. And on the other side of the street, the cops were there dealing with some kind of physical infraction. I mean, like, it is lawless. And you've got all of these high-end stores, Gucci and, all these different things, right? And it's surrounded, but like you have to navigate the filth to get into those places. It's just like if you vote differently, this will get cleaned up. You don't have to be worried about your safety to go shop it where you want to shop. Downtown, but they don't get it.
If the cost of your ideology is the destruction of other people's society, then I think you should ask questions about the moral legitimacy of its existence.
Yep.
But we're also talking about an intellectual approach. I think what we've done here is that we've narrowed down a series of ideas, and we've narrowed it down to, it's hard to say how specific, but gun culture as a whole, what we call Americana and gun culture, like they have an intersection and they have an overlap. And I think a lot of that is, if the challenge that we're dealing with on the gun control front can be on multiple levels. We can say that there's issues with the ATF, but I'm not a Supreme Court justice, so I can only do so much against that. I can share, I can participate in the community, I can change that as a long tail adjustment. And it's very reasonable to believe that the ATF and the NFA are going to push so hard that they get completely, the pendulum swing erases them. And I don't think they'll come back. I don't think they'll make a comeback in that sense. And I'd even like to propose like a solution. And the solution is dissolve the ATF, defund the ATF, dissolve it, attach a $sign to all the field agents that follows them to their respective police units, where they get to focus on crimes related to certain specific element, like whatever, whether it's the money that was defunded from the ATF is divided amongst the agents. It's attached to them, and they're disseminated amongst the states, and then that money remains attached to them for one voting cycle, no sunset clause, no renewal, and then they have to be adopted by they basically have a 2-year trial period with the police station, so then they can pursue specific types of crimes, whatever, so that you don't have an undue burden on the states, and you don't have a giant mass of people that suddenly have no job and just recreate a new institution. But then everyone who's worked on the administrative level gets the Twitter treatment, and they're just, you're done.
Yeah.
If you're involved in this legislation or this redefinition and this redefinition, sorry, your participation in civil discourse is over. Go work in the private.
A kind of funny thought comes to my mind. Do you happen to know off the top of your head when the ATF was formed?
I don't know exactly. I don't really know.
I was thinking through this. So it's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So it would have been moving of alcohol during Prohibition, right? It would have been smuggling cigarettes from New York down to, there was a big, to do about that. But those aren't so much, the alcohol and tobacco aren't really the big ones anymore, right? I mean, they do check, that.
I mean, if you're part of the
restaurants
distribution,
right, like they're following up on that, but it's not. It was formed. I'd have to fact check this, but because there's not such a heavy lift on the alcohol and the tobacco front, they've turned their attention to firearms, right? And nobody, I don't think anybody that would have been joining the ATF was like, I want to enforce stricter gun laws. Maybe now, the new ones are joining now, but back in the day, it's like, all right, like I want to keep illegal weapons from, floating around, right? We don't want to get we want to keep the bad guys from getting their hands on heavy arsenal.
Use the resources of the government to go after people who are in a specific format causing harm to society. Absolutely. It'd be like having, like you could probably rename it to the, instead of the ATF, but like the Human Trafficking and Firearms Trafficking Department. That's particularly
now that would be an entity that would make sense, for these times, right? So I don't know how much of it is legacy and just morphed over time, where it's just like, I mean, what are you guys really doing? Like, are you signing up to be the executive arm of tyrannical, law changes?
Yes. I mean, at some point in time, you have to say yes. I'm just doing my job. Doesn't go so far. It doesn't last forever. Or you can even justify that excuse and say, congratulations, you're just a very articulate bad guy.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, they're not every, I think you can ask yourself that question for sure. And that's a solution, though. Like, I think that's a solution to the ATF's issue, but it begins with, I think it really begins with, if you live in a community, look at who's running for office in a judge and get to know who's adjudicating your law. Because if you can complain all day about police abuse and enforcement, look at who's running the law. Who is there? What are they doing? Who are they affiliating with? What are they advocating for? What is their track record? Because if you can say that such and such is running for AG and they've prosecuted 45 personal defense cases with a handgun or whatever, you can pretty much be safe to assume that they don't believe you have the right to defend your life.
Right.
And so I wouldn't want them at even the county level of adjudication.
Well, and we need to get more people smart on how to focus their efforts for a greater impact in the direction that they want things to go. I think a lot of people know that shit's fucked up. A lot of people want it to change, but not a lot of people know how to implement maximum effect, right? You can waste your time fighting with somebody else that you're never going to convince them of your ideals, or you can go around and have a more effective mechanism.
Yes, I agree. I have spent hours arguing with people that weren't worth the time. It's a mistake.
I wasted a whole Saturday when I first started my social media, the KÄGWERKS Instagram page. I got trolled I wasted about a whole Saturday trying to educate and rationalize. And then I realized I'm like, oh, this guy's just fucking with me. And then
Yep.
so now if you troll on KÄGWERKS page, boom, you just get deleted.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
it's better. I just don't even want you in the atmosphere.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't. There's certain things where you can like, it's not worth engaging with. It's a really easy one. Like, it's the same thing of like, if you want to get into politics, it's like if it's a left leaning person talking about fascism, it's like, cool, thanks, bye. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have any value to. There's no value to that conversation anymore because the idea, the language around it has been distilled into nothingness. It's just like it's nothing. There's no. You might as well be expressing meaningless platitudes. So when it comes to gun culture, let's kind of close off on this one then. We've talked about a lot. We've had a really good longer chat today about not only like the kind of the difficulties of transitioning and setting goals, and we've talked about gun culture and kind of how we think about the world and who we pick as our friends and how we orient ourselves towards something meaningful and valuable. We've looked at it on a bit of a microcosm when it comes to gun culture as itself, or a slightly larger perspective of like our communities as a whole, to even a little bit on the national level. And we have all this chaos going on out there, whether it's you want to bring up issues at the World Economic Forum or discrepancies in election issues, or even, I don't know what else you'd want to say, like the threat of Donald Trump being a new emperor, king, whatever. Again, it's you can go out there and make somebody else's problem your identity. Good for you. Boring. But when it comes to gun culture, and I think we're seeing people come together. I think the division is pretty much speckling out. I don't know, dispersing out. What are things that you think, if you were to talk to a younger version of yourself, what would you tell them to focus on when it came to your business and your community? And what would you tell them to let go and kind of like
I think I would definitely, the first thing I would tell my younger self is like don't ever put yourself inside of a box. I considered myself a knuckle dragon body dropper for so long that it was like only a couple of years ago that I go like, oh my God, you're a closet nerd, Garrett. Like I am, you know what I mean? So I tell my younger self, like, never put yourself in a box, put yourself out there more. When you expose yourself, there's the potential that you're going to take some licks, but the upside is so much greater than the downside, right? So, if I had to do all over again, I wouldn't put myself, I wouldn't put myself into a box, and I would, I'm grateful for where I'm at, right? It took me, I'm 42. It took me 7 years to build KÄGWERKS products, and I think the training company is right along there. And then having that scare like 2 years ago, I'm like, holy shit, like I am finite, and I want to do more, right? I want to experience more. So like, I would tell my younger self, just get out there and get a bunch of experiences, like, you know what I mean? Because all my experiences have like made me well-rounded, a well-rounded individual.
Okay, because the event we're talking about 2 years ago is you had a brain tumor.
Yeah.
And here's an odd one. You said that discovering that had come about, discovering the brain tumor brought a sense of mortality to you.
Yeah.
It's sort of that it brought a sense of mortality. Is there are there things that you are thankful that you have done that you wouldn't have done before finding that out, before that event? So
Yeah, no, it woke me up. I mean,
okay,
yeah, I was, deploying like crazy, right? And I had a
yes,
couple, I had a couple of kids, so it was like 4 months gone, 35 days home with the family, and just rinse and repeat, right? So I missed a lot of my two oldest um, younger years, right? And then I started, I got involved with a couple other companies, and it was still like that was took up a lot of my attention and time. And then I started KÄGWERKS, right? And that was just, I mean, my kids had fallen asleep like on the stairs because I was on a call, like cooking them dinner. And finally, when the dinner was ready, like they were already passed out, right? And so I went from like never thinking that I was going to live past 20 or 21 to going through all of that stuff, and then getting diagnosed with a brain tumor. I was like, oh shoot, right? So I had to take a year off to relearn to speak. I have aphasia, um, and so I was like, yeah, that was like a reality check where I was like,
okay,
okay, like my kids have paid the price for how motivated I was for chasing these different things. And I was always justifying it in my head. I was like, well, I'm providing for them. Like I might not be there now, but they're going to get to go to college later. But
sure,
when you're brought right to the brink, it's like it puts things into perspective. So now um, a healthy balance, and I leave here, every night every day at a certain time, so I can pick my daughter up and take her to jujitsu, or
That's,
or my son to baseball or whatever sport he's playing, or the baby to dance, right? So
I have one more question that fits within the same vein of this one that we've had. Is that um, it's a common story that young men who go into the military for a while feel like they're invincible, or there's this, like young men feel invincible until they're faced with morality. And so like I think in your story, the way that I was understanding it, it's like, yeah, you went into the military, you thought, how am I going to make it through this deployment? And then after a while, you had this feeling of invincibility, which was eventually shaken by discovering you had a tumor. And so, so some men, when they're young, don't get that they get that lesson that they're not immoral. Like they get that lesson that they're not immoral, and then they figure things out and they work forward through there. I think another group of people, which is the man who, like the young people who maybe wanted to join the military but due to complications could not, and as a result they spend the next 10 years of their lives living in agony because they couldn't do that one thing. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like
no,
it's they essentially they never got the rite of passage or whatever. My experience in Ranger Battalion was that I thought it was going to be a rite of passage, and it wasn't. My RIP class was a joke, but that's a story for another time that other people have heard. We were in I when I went through RIP, instead of starting with 125 and graduating 25, we started with like 315 and graduated 280. So like the majority of us were in
they were
that
they were
fit in that.
backfilling hard.
They were backfilling really hard. So when we got to our teams, we didn't know. Some guys knew that they made it in. Some guys knew that they shouldn't have made it in. And then there was the middle crowd, which was like, did I pass or did I not? Was I allowed in or was I not allowed in? And then their team leader was forced with the social dilemma of trying to figure out whether or not that person was good or not. And that took about a year. It took a year for Battalion to recover from that, at least
Yeah.
third bat, until we had weeded out all the trash bags and all the shit, all the shit bags and all the people who couldn't hold their weight and whatever. But for many people in this culture, in America and in gun culture, that wanted some sort of rite of passage and were denied that, whether by genetics or events or accidents, spend decades in regret for something that didn't happen. What would you say to those people? Because like I hear the story and it's like, no man, you're right on. Let's figure this out. Life is good. I mean, it's tough, but whatever.
I would say the more you dwell on what didn't happen is the more time you're going to waste not being able to identify the thing that you might fall in love with that might make your life hit, the next gear. It's like, in shooting, I say, when they fuck up a reload, right? Like they're doing a course of fire and they fuck up a reload, and then it's like, and then they're focused on that screw up, and then it keeps the problem just rolls into the next step of the mechanics, right? And I'm like, look, you can't drive looking through the rear view, right?
Mm-hmm.
It happened, let it go, and focus your attention on the next thing, because there's all kinds of stuff can get screwed up when you're driving through the rear view, right? Even if you're like, you're like, oh well, I tried to go in, but something precluded me. Well, I mean, I think Christian Ausnammer.
Yeah. Solid guy.
So he had a medical issue. He couldn't get into military. I met him, sent him off to train with Drew Estel from Bear Solutions, developed a friendship with him. Now he's working here at KÄGWERKS, like 5 offices down.
Well, give him my regards. Christian's a solid character.
He told me to tell you hello. So,
okay.
But yeah, I mean, so he's not dwelling on the thing that he never got to do. He can play a part serving in the bigger, effort, and he does that. He does it very well. So, my guidance would just be like, the more time you spend looking in the rear view, you're just missing that much more stuff out the windshield.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we'll close on that one then. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes down the pipe from KÄGWERKS. As much as that sounds like a fun time, I also need to make it up to the Pacific Northwest and spend some time with you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. Come on up, and we'll give you a tour and kind of show you all the cool stuff that we're working on. We're redefining the tactical network. So, big. Yeah.
Can't say too much.
Oh, no, I just don't want to come off like a braggart, but I mean, we are making a heavy dent, and yeah, it's really exciting to see. Not in the growth of KÄGWERKS, but in the capability of our guys downrange, and we get to support that and be a part of it. So, I mean, that's what I do this for. So.
Yeah, the entire ecosystem that you're running this company on did not exist while I was when I was in Ranger Bat. It's like no. I remember constantly hearing like little snippets on the what eventually became ATAC and what eventually became the system that's running, and it's like, well, that sounds really cool. But it didn't come into light. It did not. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've got a KÄGWERKS. I've got a phone on both of my plate carriers now.
Right.
And it's an invaluable tool. But it's a very different world.
It is, so. And we walk a fine line between giving you information that you need, but not overwhelming you with that you forget that you're actually in a battle space, right? So
fair, yeah.
So it's like just enough, not too much. How do I know where you're at? How do I get your PLI data? But I don't necessarily want you coming over the network at me and hogging up the line, right? So sure. It's kind of having enough nerd brain and enough ranger brain that I can bridge the gap pretty well, and then and come up with solutions, and our team is kind of thinking all along that same thought track.
Well, we also live in a time of changing warfare. Things are not the same as this is not. You cannot win just like Napoleon, a Napoleonic victory would have been impossible in World War II.
Yeah.
So, you know, like the world is changing, and the integration of technology and the capabilities of the individual are something to be respected. I definitely can look back at my grandfather and say, I respect the grit that you had to fight in World War II and to be a POW and fight in Korea and be a POW there and just grit through it. And now that we can take that and add to that grit this capacity of the intellect and the strong, the smart, like the intelligence of it on how do I build my objectives and set my plans out there, and then like see it to fulfillment. It's war will never be the same.
Yeah, and I think it's gotten to a point where it is on the razor's edge of like being so technology dependent that we can't forget our old school way of doing things, because you know it can set off you know, an EMP event, and it's like, oh, we're back to the Stone Age on the battle space. Like, what do we do?
Yeah, this is why Rangers always learn to navigate with map and compass. I hope they still do. Like, I really hope you do. Like, you got to learn how to do that. It's not that hard. It takes a couple of times. But like, remember, some people learn how to land nav in Ranger selection, and the fact that they can learn how to do it in selection is like, it's not that hard. You just got to figure out how to do it. And the consequences of failure, if you go way overboard, might be living alone in Yosemite for like 3 days and getting really hungry and hoping you don't die. But that's the kind of thing where we're talking about generational differences. Is if you want to complain about the nanny state of the United States and how safety oriented it is, you're going to have to be the person who volunteers to go into danger and figure it out. And if you don't volunteer, because no one's going to give you permission, no one's going to be like, no good serving tyrant is going to be like, yes, you can be a free man. Yeah. So cool. Well, let's call this we went over time. It's a good talk. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
I did as well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit down and have a conversation with us on the Redacted Culture Cast. Where do people follow KÄGWERKS and you, and even on the civilian side, if they're interested in what you guys are working on, or they have something they can assets, or whether it's any way, shape, or form? How do people get a hold of you?
It's KÄGWERKS.com is the product side. And if you're interested in the training side, we've got trainkagwerks.com. And then we're on social media as well. Kind of, it's a blending of the two worlds, like content that is a blend of the two worlds. And that's KÄGWERKS.
Yep, and KÄGWERKS is KAGWERKS.
Correct.